The decision of this council is unanimous. All military aid currently stationed on the Varsak homeworld is to be called back, and such a useless species is to be ignored in the future. Good luck fending for yourselves, and consider this meeting adjourned," said the president of the Galactic Council through the virtual channel, and the connection was severed, sending Credir back to reality. The abrupt transition left Credir disoriented. The virtual session dissolved into nothingness, replaced by the familiar surroundings of his modest quarters. Evening light filtered through the single window above his bed, bathing the room in a warm orange glow that normally would have been comforting. The wooden furniture, simple but practical, cast the familiar shadows across the padded floor, a necessity for warmth during the cold nights on the Varsak homeworld. Credir remained frozen, his small hands still gripping the virtual reality helmet. He stared at its shiny visor, catching glimpses of his own reflection. 4 feet tall, with a body covered entirely in cinnamon-colored fur from his head to the tips of his toes. His limbs were notoriously thin and weak, even by Varsak standards, which themselves were considered laughable by galactic measurements of strength. The 2 antennae protruding from his forehead, purely aesthetic evolutionary remnants with no actual sensory function, tensed involuntarily as stress coursed through his diminutive frame. In any gathering of galactic species, the Varsak were immediately recognized as the ones who had been voted the clumsiest species for 60 cycles in a row, and now, it seemed, they had finally exhausted the patience of the Galactic Council. With trembling hands, Credir attempted to place the virtual reality helmet on the bedside table. His movements were characteristically uncoordinated, a trait shared by all Varsak. The helmet slipped from his grasp, tumbling toward the floor. In a desperate attempt to catch it, he lunged forward, only to knock over a small decorative vase. The helmet landed with a soft thud on the padded floor, while the ceramic vase shattered against the wooden edge of the bed frame. Credir sighed deeply, carefully stepping around the fragments to retrieve the helmet. "Perhaps they're right," he muttered to himself, finally managing to place the helmet safely on the bed. "Perhaps we truly are too useless to be worth the Council's time and resources." He settled onto the edge of the bed, his thoughts wandering to all the instances where the Varsak had failed to contribute meaningfully to the Galactic Council's initiatives. Their scientists, while earnest, were consistently outperformed by virtually every other species' brightest minds. Their technological advancements were minimal and often derivative of others' innovations. The very few Varsak who had attempted to join the Council's military forces had become infamous for accidentally discharging weapons during training or tripping over their own feet during ceremonial parades. Even in bureaucratic matters, where physical prowess was irrelevant, the Varsak had developed a reputation for being inefficient. Their administrators were known throughout the galaxy for being overly sentimental, making exceptions to rules that should have been strictly enforced, and generally allowing their emotions to cloud their judgment. What other galactic species viewed as necessary firmness, the Varsak saw as unnecessary cruelty. "How am I going to tell the elders?" Credir whispered, rubbing his temples with his small fingers. The Council of Elders had appointed him as ambassador, specifically because he was slightly less clumsy than the average Varsak, a dubious honor that now felt like a cruel joke. He rose from the bed and began pacing the room, his mind racing through possible solutions to their dire situation. Without the Council's protection, the Varsak homeworld would be vulnerable to invasion. Their planet, rich in rare species, yet populated by a species physically incapable of defending it, would be an irresistible target for resource-hungry factions or independent raiders. "We could appeal the decision?" he mused aloud, then immediately dismissed the idea. The Council President's tone had been final, and gathering support from other Council members seemed unlikely. The Varsak had few allies. "Perhaps we could hire mercenaries." This option seemed more viable, until Credir remembered the state of their planetary treasury. The
The Varsak economy was stable but modest, certainly not robust enough to maintain a mercenary defense force indefinitely. Frustration mounting, he considered diplomatic options. Formal alliances with individual council members, perhaps, or with non-council species. But who would ally themselves with a species universally regarded as useless? In a rare display of anger, Credir balled his tiny hand into a fist and struck the nearest piece of furniture, a wooden chair. The impact was negligible to the chair, but sent a jolt of pain through Credir's hand. Worse, the force of the punch threw him off balance. His feet tangled beneath him, and he tumbled gracelessly to the padded floor, landing with an undignified thump. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, Credir felt a memory surface. A conversation from cycles ago, when he had first assumed his role as ambassador. It was a memory of the only species that had ever found the Varsak's clumsiness funny rather than pathetic. The only species that had actively advocated for the Varsak to be exempted from military service rather than mocking their inability to fight. The only species whose representatives had consistently expressed genuine optimism about the Varsak's future, insisting that one day they would discover their unique talents and contribution to galactic society. Humans. Credir remembered them vividly. While most species in the Council were either human-like or insectoid or somewhere in between, humans stood out for their remarkable strength and their strange, contradictory nature. They were physically stronger than the Varsak, though that wasn't saying much, but nowhere near as powerful as the warrior races like the Draknar or the Vorgar. Their intelligence was above average, but not exceptional by galactic standards. What made them unique was their inexplicable creativity, their willingness to attempt solutions that more logical species would never consider, and their baffling optimism in the face of overwhelming odds. That optimism had often manifested as humor, finding amusement in situations others considered serious. The Varsak's clumsiness, which elicited contempt from most species, had always seemed to delight the humans. They never laughed at the Varsak in mockery, but rather with a kind of appreciative wonder, as if the Varsak possessed some charming quality that others couldn't see. Still lying on the floor, Credir's thoughts turned to one human in particular, Thomas Harris, Earth's ambassador to the Council during Credir's early years in his position. Thomas, or Tom, as he had insisted Credir call him, had been the first council member to treat Credir as an equal rather than a representative of an inferior species. In turn, Tom had abbreviated Credir's name to Crid, claiming that friends used shortened versions of each other's names as a sign of affection. Their friendship had been unlikely but genuine. Tom had been patient with Credir's clumsiness, never growing frustrated when the Varsak accidentally spilled drinks at diplomatic functions, or tripped over ceremonial robes during important proceedings. Instead, he had often diverted attention from these mishaps with well-timed jokes, or by pretending he had been about to do something similar himself. But that friendship had ended abruptly when humanity had been expelled from the Galactic Council. Their crime being unpredictable, chaotic, and potentially dangerous. The final straw had been an incident involving an expensive council flagship with malfunctioning systems. A human engineer had attempted what they called percussive maintenance, essentially hitting the delicate core components with a tool until they started working again. Remarkably, it had worked, but the council had been horrified by the primitive approach and the potential risks it had posed. Credir sat up suddenly. If the Varsak needed allies now, perhaps humans would be willing to help. After all, both species now shared the dubious honor of council rejection, though for entirely different reasons. Without consulting the elders, an unprecedented breach of protocol that would have shocked him just hours earlier, Credir scrambled to his feet and retrieved the virtual reality helmet. He climbed awkwardly onto the bed, nearly falling twice in the process, and placed the helmet over his head. The physical world dissolved around him, replaced by the neutral virtual environment used for communications. With practiced mental commands, he invoked a floating screen displaying his contact list. It was embarrassingly short, mostly official contacts for various elders and Varsac officials, and a single entry from outside his species. Tom Harris. Credir hesitated, his virtual finger hovering over the contact. It had been nearly 2 cycles since they had last spoken. What if Tom had forgotten him? What if humans held grudges like the Caligari, who were known to maintain feuds for generations? What if Tom simply didn't want to be reminded of his time on the council that had rejected his species? With a decisive motion, Credir pressed the call button. The screen showed the connection in progress logo, indicating that the call was connecting. Credir felt his heart racing, his antennae moving nervously as he waited, rehearsing opening lines in his mind. Should he be formal? Casual? Should he apologize for the long silence, or simply pretend it hadn't happened? Before he could decide, the screen shifted, and the familiar face of Thomas Harris appeared. He looked older than Credir remembered, more lines around his eyes and mouth, grey streaks in his formerly dark hair. But his eyes still held that uniquely human spark of curiosity and warmth. "Ambassador Credir," Tom said, his tone formal but not unfriendly. "This is unexpected." "Ambassador Thomas," Credir replied with equal formality, noting that they had reverted to using each other's full names. "I hope I'm not disturbing you?" "Not at all. It's been a while." An awkward silence followed, heavy with unspoken questions. Credir searched for a safe topic to ease the tension. "Your hair has changed colour," he finally said, immediately regretting the observation. Was it impolite to mention such things to humans? He couldn't remember. To his relief, Tom smiled. "Happens to the best of us. You look exactly the same, though. One of the benefits of Varsac physiology, I suppose. Aging gracefully." "We don't change much externally," Credir agreed. "Though I assure you, my joints feel every cycle that passes." Tom's smile widened slightly. "So, what can I do for you, Ambassador? I doubt this is a social call after all this time." "Actually," Credir began, then paused. It seemed wrong to immediately dive into his problems. "Perhaps we could catch up first. I've often wondered how you've been since the council's decision." Something in Tom's expression softened. "That's very like you, Cred." The use of the nickname sent a wave of relief through Credir. Perhaps their friendship wasn't beyond salvaging after all. "Life after the council has been interesting," Tom continued. "Humans don't take rejection well, as you might remember. But we're also stubborn as hell. Being knocked out forced us to forge our own path." "I remember that stubbornness," Credir said, a fond memory surfacing. "Like when you insisted on teaching me that human game. What was it called? The one with the cards?" "Poker," Tom supplied, chuckling. "You were terrible at it, no offense." "None taken, Tom. I was terrible. The Varsac face is too expressive for deception." They both laughed, and just like that, the years of silence between them seemed to melt away. They reminisced about council meetings where Credir had accidentally activated the wrong translation settings, causing his heartfelt speech about cooperation to be rendered as a recipe for a soup. They recalled diplomatic dinners, where Tom had pretended to enjoy Varsac cuisine despite its notoriously bland taste to human palates. As they talked, Credir carefully avoided mentioning his current predicament, wanting to extend this pleasant reconnection as long as possible. But eventually, Tom brought up the subject himself. "It was something to see you and the other Varsac defending humanity during our expulsion hearings," he said. "Your species might not be the most eloquent or forceful, but there was something touching about watching you all try so hard, even knowing it wouldn't change the outcome." Credir saw his opening. "Ironically, we've now joined you in council exile, though technically we're still members." Tom's eyebrows rose in surprise. "The Varsac? Expelled? What happened? Not officially expelled, Credir clarified, but the Council has withdrawn all military protection and declared us, in the President's words, a useless species to be ignored in the future, which amounts to the same thing, really. Without protection, it's only a matter of time before someone decides our mineral resources are worth taking. He expected sympathy, perhaps even concern. What he didn't expect was the broad grin that spread across Tom's face. Tom, did you hear what I said? My entire species is in danger. I heard you, Crid, and I'm not happy about the danger part, but I am excited about the possibilities. Possibilities? Credir echoed, confused. Look, after humanity got booted from the Council, we didn't just sulk in a corner of the galaxy. We started building our own network, an alliance of outcasts and overlooked species. Turns out there are quite a few civilizations that don't meet the Council's exacting standards of usefulness or predictability. Credir's antennae perked up with interest. You formed your own council? Nothing so formal. We call it the Cooperative. Less hierarchical, more collaborative. And we might be exactly what the Varsec needs right now. I haven't even informed the elders about the council's decision yet, Credir admitted. I was hoping you might have some advice, but I never expected. An actual solution? Tom finished for him, still grinning. That's what friends are for, Crid. The elders will need convincing, Credir cautioned. They've always been conservative, and aligning with expelled council members might seem desperate. Aren't you desperate? Tom asked bluntly. Credir couldn't argue with that. Yes, I suppose we are, but the elders will want assurances, details about this cooperative and what joining would entail. Then I'll come to you, Tom decided instantly. Nothing convinces like a face-to-face meeting. Besides, I've missed your planet's perpetual autumn. Earth has seasons, it's all very dramatic compared to your world's pleasant consistency. You would do that? Credir was touched by the offer. Absolutely, and not just because the Varsec would be valuable additions to the cooperative. It's because it's you asking, Crid. The conversation continued, details were arranged, and by the time they disconnected, Credir felt a spark of hope that had been absent when the council president had delivered the fatal verdict. As he removed the virtual reality helmet and set it aside with uncharacteristic grace, he allowed himself to imagine a future where the Varsec found their place in the galaxy, not as the clumsy species everyone pitied, but as a valued member of a new kind of interstellar community. 1 month later, Credir found himself leading Tom through the halls of a Varsec educational facility. The formal diplomatic meetings had concluded days ago, with the elders cautiously agreeing to consider the cooperative's offer of alliance and protection. Now, Tom had requested a tour of ordinary Varsec life to better understand the species he was hoping to integrate into his coalition. The school was a source of pride for Credir, a place where young Varsec learned not just academic subjects, but also practical skills to compensate for their natural clumsiness. The architecture featured rounded corners, padded surfaces, and stability rails along every wall. Nothing was fragile, nothing was sharp, and everything was built to withstand accidental impacts. And this is our practical physics laboratory, Credir explained, gesturing to a room where young Varsec were attempting to build simple machines. We emphasize hands-on learning whenever possible, although, as you can see, it often leads to... A crash interrupted him as a youth accidentally knocked over an elaborate pulley system. The other students helped clean up without comment or mockery. Such accidents were simply part of Varsec life. Credir glanced at Tom, expecting him to be paying close attention, but the human's gaze was directed elsewhere, watching a group of students in the courtyard, visible through the window. His expression was thoughtful, almost distracted. Tom, is something wrong? Tom turned back to him. Oh, Sorry, just thinking. About what? Kridir pressed, suddenly worried. Is it the Alliance? Have you changed your mind? Tom shook his head. No, nothing like that. I'm just, struggling with something. I came here confident that we could find a role for the Varsak in the cooperative, but after a week of observation, I'm still not sure what that role should be. He gestured toward the courtyard. Your people are kind, thoughtful, and well-meaning. But every species in the cooperative contributes something unique. The Nuldrin have their advanced biotechnology. The Zen, their unparalleled spaceship designs. Even the tiny Mick, with their ability to survive in toxic environments, serves as our hazardous material experts. And you're wondering what we bring to the table. Kridir finished for him, his voice flat. I'm wondering how best to defend your abilities to other members, Tom corrected gently. I know there's something the Varsak excel at. I just haven't found it yet, and I don't think touring another school is helping me discover it. Kridir sighed, leading Tom away from the laboratory toward a quieter corridor. You don't need to sugarcoat it, Tom. We Varsak are well aware of our limitations. Why do you think we accepted the Council's protection for so long? We can't fight, our scientific contributions are minimal, and even our administrative abilities are compromised by what other species see as excessive emotionality. He attempted a self-deprecating smile. Did you know our most famous scientific breakthrough was when Dr. Linidar's team accidentally created a powerful aphrodisiac for the Kragat, a predator species, when they were attempting to develop a poison? The Kragat birth rate tripled the following season. The Council was furious. They'd been trying to control the Kragat population for cycles. Tom laughed. That's actually impressive in its own way. It's embarrassing, Kridir corrected, as is the fact that our military exercises routinely end with more self-inflicted injuries than training objectives completed, or that our diplomatic corps is known throughout the galaxy for agreeing to unfavorable terms because we're too polite to negotiate aggressively. Tom remained quiet for a moment, then asked, Where else can we visit? Somewhere that isn't an educational or governmental facility? Kridir considered. There's the Central Library nearby. It houses our historical archives and cultural collection. Would that interest you? Lead the way, Tom agreed. As they walked toward the library, Tom continued his gentle probing. There must be something the Varsak are naturally good at. Every species evolves with some advantage. Our fur is quite soft, Kridir offered sarcastically. Perhaps we could be the galaxy's pillow stuffing. Be serious, Krid. I am being serious. Our evolutionary path favored caution and retreat over confrontation. We've survived as a species by being harmless, not by excelling at anything particular. By the time they reached the library, a low, sprawling building with the same safety features as the school, Kridir was feeling increasingly defensive. He appreciated Tom's optimism, but the human's persistent belief that the Varsak must have some hidden talent was starting to feel patronizing. As they entered the main hall, however, both were brought up short by an unexpected sight. 3 young Varsak had assembled what appeared to be a makeshift gaming station, perched precariously on a chair. The youths were huddled around a small projection screen, their fingers touching control interfaces with surprising dexterity. On the screen, stylized figures were engaged in combat, moving with fluid grace that stood in contrast to the typical Varsak movements. Colorful energy blasts and impossibly acrobatic maneuvers filled the display. A booming voice occasionally intoned phrases like, "Finish him!" followed by representations of graphic violence that seemed wildly out of place in the sedate library. Kridir was shocked into momentary silence before anger took over. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the quiet space. The young Varsak jumped in surprise, nearly toppling their setup. One of them fumbled with the controls, freezing the game. Ambassador Kridir," the tallest of the 3 stammered. "We were just—" I can see exactly what you were doing, Credir cut him off. Playing games in the library, and human combat games no less. Have you no shame, no sense of propriety? The younglings looked at the floor, their antennae drooping in embarrassment. Do you have any idea, Credir continued, his voice rising, what's at stake for our species right now, while you waste time with these violent distractions? Ambassador Harris and I are trying to secure alliances that might prevent our entire world from being invaded. He gestured at Tom. Humans have come to help us, to find some way that our species might prove useful to the galaxy. And what do they find? Varsag youth who can't even focus on their education for one day? The tirade might have continued, but Tom placed a restraining hand on Credir's shoulder. Actually, he said, his voice thoughtful, what game is that, exactly? The youngest exchanged uncertain glances before the smallest answered. Immortal Kombat 7, sir? It's a human game? I know it, Tom said, stepping closer to examine their setup. That's an advanced version, too. The neural responsive edition that adapts to player reflexes. He turned to Credir. Do you realize how impressive it is that they can play this? Most species find human reaction-based games too fast-paced. Even some humans struggle with how violent this one is. Credir blinked in confusion. It's just a game, Tom. A game that requires split-second timing, complex input combinations, and the ability to predict and counter an opponent's moves. Tom corrected. He turned back to the young Varsak. How long have you been playing? About 4 months, the tallest answered, still nervous but clearly pleased by Tom's interest. We play every day after studies? And you've mastered the advanced combo system already? Tom sounded genuinely impressed. Let me see you play. As the younglings eagerly restarted their game, Credir pulled Tom aside. This is a waste of time. What does their proficiency at entertainment have to do with our survival as a species? Tom wasn't listening. He was watching the young Varsak play with intense concentration. After several minutes, he turned to Credir with a broad smile that seemed entirely out of place given the circumstances. I've got it, he announced. I know exactly how we're going to protect your planet. Through video games? Credir scoffed. Don't be absurd. Not absurd at all, Tom insisted. In fact, it's brilliant. But you'll need to let go of some preconceived notions about what constitutes valuable skills in galactic society. He glanced at the young players, then back to Credir. Are you willing to hear me out? Really hear me out? Without dismissing the idea immediately because it doesn't fit your understanding of what's serious or important? Credir wanted to argue, but the excitement in Tom's expression gave him pause. This was the most animated he'd seen his friend since his arrival, and, he had to admit, they had few other options. Very well, he conceded. I'm listening. Tom gestured toward an empty reading area. Let's sit down. This might take a while to explain, but I promise you, by the time we're done, you're gonna see your species, and these kids, in a whole new light. Intrigued despite his skepticism, Credir followed Tom to the reading area. The 3 young Varsak, noticing the ambassadors settling in for a serious discussion, paused their game and edged closer, clearly curious about what the human had in mind. Tom smiled at them, waving them over. You 3 might want to hear this too. In fact, I want you here to answer some questions. As they gathered around, Tom leaned forward, his eyes bright with the particular intensity that Credir had come to recognize as uniquely human inspiration, the kind that other species often dismissed as madness until it unexpectedly succeeded. Let me tell you about a concept humans call thinking outside the box, Tom began, and how your supposed weaknesses might actually be averaged to work in your favor. The conversation that followed would change the course of Varsak history forever. 3 years later, Credir stood by the large panoramic window of the command center, sipping a steaming cup of coffee, a habit he'd acquired from Tom. The human beverage had initially tasted bitter and unpleasant to his Varsac palate, but he'd grown to appreciate its complex flavors and the alertness it provided. Much like his relationship with humanity, what had once seemed strange and uncomfortable had become a source of comfort and strength. Outside, the normally peaceful horizon of the Varsac homeworld was interrupted by flashes of light and plumes of smoke. The invasion they had long feared had finally come. The Draknar, notorious for their aggressive expansion and dismissal of diplomacy, had arrived with a fleet of battleships that darkened the sky. Their blaster beams cut through the morning air, striking the outskirts of the capital with devastating power. Each impact sent tremors through the ground, even at this distance. Credir took another sip of his coffee, watching the destruction with a calmness that would have been unthinkable 3 years ago. Back then, such an attack would have been devastating. Today, it was merely the beginning of a demonstration. He turned away from the window, surveying the vast chamber behind him. Rows upon rows of Varsac sat in specially designed chairs, each wearing a virtual reality helmet similar to the one he had once used for council communications. But these helmets served a very different purpose now. Each was connected to a complex neural interface, allowing the wearer to control something far more substantial than avatars in a virtual meeting space. The room was eerily quiet, despite housing over 200 Varsac. Only the occasional murmur or soft chuckle broke the silence, signs of concentration rather than concern. On the wall opposite the window, an enormous screen displayed real-time footage of the battle unfolding beyond the city limits. It was to this screen that Credir now turned his attention. The Draknar fleet was formidable, 50 ships of varying sizes, from nimble fighters to massive destroyers. They moved in the coordinated patterns typical of a species that had evolved for warfare, their tactics honed across centuries of conquest. Under normal circumstances, such a force would have subdued the Varsac world in hours. But what they faced was anything but normal. Rising to meet the Draknar ships were figures that seemed to defy physics. Massive, humanoid machines standing taller than most buildings. Each gleamed with a distinctive color scheme and design elements that reflected their pilots' personalities. Some were bulky and heavily armored, while others were sleeker and built for speed. All moved with a certain grace that no one would have associated with the Varsac species 3 years ago. "Status report," Credir requested, addressing a young Varsac who monitored communications from a console near the screen. "The Draknar commander is demanding our surrender," she replied, her voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "They claim resistance is pointless and will only lead to unnecessary destruction." "And our response?" The young operator's antennae folded with amusement. "Commander Linrit sent them footage of what happened to the pirate fleet that attempted a raid last month. The Draknar have stopped broadcasting." Credir nodded, turning back to the screen. The battle was intensifying, the Draknar realizing that this would not be the easy conquest they had anticipated, had deployed their full arsenal. Energy weapons flared against defensive shields. Smaller fighters swarmed around the humanoid machines, looking like insects attacking giants. And at the center of it all was the most impressive machine of all, a titanium and composite colossus, standing nearly twice as tall as its companions. Its midnight blue armor absorbed light, making it seem like a void in space itself. In its hands, it wielded a massive sword with edges that glowed with contained plasma energy, hot enough to slice through starship hulls. As Credir watched, this behemoth crouched, its systems gathering energy, then launched itself skyward with a burst of propulsion that defied its enormous mass. It soared higher than seemed possible, the plasma-edged sword held high above its head. At the apex of its jump, it brought the blade down in a perfect arc, cleaving through a Draknar destroyer as if it were cutting through water, rather than reinforced alien alloys. The destroyer split in two, each half drifting apart before secondary explosions consumed them both. The giant machine landed with surprising lightness, already pivoting to engage its next target. "That's Tinir, isn't it?" Credir asked, recognizing the distinctive fighting style.
"Yes, Ambassador,"
the communications officer confirmed.
"He's improved significantly since last month's exercises."
Credir smiled faintly. Tinir had been one of the 3 young Varsak they had discovered playing human games in the library 3 years ago. Now, he was the lead pilot in what had become known as the Varsak Defense Force, an elite unit of virtual pilots who controlled these machines, which humans called Mecha, for the safety of the command center. Of course, another unit to control a space fleet as well. The ingenuity of Tom's plan still amazed Credir. The human had recognized what no one else had, that the Varsak's natural clumsiness in the physical world could be completely bypassed in a virtual environment. Their neural pathways were actually exceptionally well suited for rapid processing of complex sensory input and precise control through technological interfaces. With human engineering assistance, they had developed the remote-controlled mecha units that now defended their world. The control systems were specifically calibrated to Varsak neurology, making them essentially impossible for other species to operate effectively. What had once been a species known only for being clumsy and ineffectual was now becoming renowned throughout the galaxy for having the most advanced remote piloting force in known space. On the screen, the battle was reaching its conclusion. The remaining Draknar ships had broken formation and were attempting to retreat. The mecha units pursued with relentless speed, disabling engines and weapon systems with precision strikes. Credir felt a swell of pride as he watched his people defend themselves for the first time in their history. The Varsak had found their purpose, their unique contribution to galactic society. They were no longer the species that everyone gave up on. They were becoming the species that everyone wanted as allies. His thoughts turned to Tom, now serving as the official human ambassador to the Varsak homeworld. The human had seen potential where everyone else, including the Varsak themselves, had seen only limitations. He had noticed a trait in their young that their own elders had dismissed as frivolous.
"Ambassador,"
the communications officer called, interrupting his thoughts.
"we're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. They're requesting information about our defense systems."
Credir laughed softly. Of course they were. The same council that had abandoned them as useless was now undoubtedly concerned about the impressive military capability the Varsak had developed seemingly overnight. "Tell them I'll be happy to discuss it at the next council meeting," he replied. "Schedule it for the 30th of February on the human calendar." As he turned back to the window, watching the distant flashes of combat grow less frequent as the invaders were systematically defeated, Credir felt a profound gratitude toward humanity and especially toward Tom. They had seen value where others saw only weakness, potential where others saw only limitation. Everyone had given up on the Varsak, except humanity. And because of that exceptional human perspective, the Varsak had finally found their place among the stars.